So in today's video, we're going to take a look at the 60s and 70s British James Bond annuals. So I absolutely love these annuals, and I think you're going to enjoy looking through them as well. So let's get... So this is the first Bond annual that we're going to be looking at today. Now, this one came out in 1965, and it was published by World Distributors. And at this time, Bond had already had a few movies released and was, well, for want of better words, an absolute sensation. Connery was firmly established in the role, and this book, which is such a high standard for a 60s British annual, really pays tribute to those movies. So I'll just have a look through. So 12 and 6. Yes, 1965 was the publishing date for this one. If we just go through, you'll get an idea of just how good the quality was. Now, like most British annuals of the time, it had comic strips. The illustrators weren't anyone of particular note, alas. However, you know, they're not bad. They're not too bad a quality, but the stories are quite generic. It didn't actually need to be Bond in the role. It could have been pretty much any sort of spy. And Spy Mania was all the rage. By this time, The Man from U.N.C.L.E. had started airing on TV, and The Saint as well, so there was quite a bit of it going around. Even The Avengers, you could say, tied in loosely to the Bond spy craze of the 60s. And these annuals, as well as having the text stories and the written and the comic strips, they were famous for having these full-page colour photographs. So it would usually feature up to the latest movie, and they really are excellent. In almost every Bond annual that they made, they did like a potted recap of the character and sort of best villains and Bond girls and things like that. But these 60s ones are, I just think, fantastic. There's 3 in the series to get, with this obviously being the first one, and they're just so great. They're colourful. They've got so much. I mean, there was a lot here for your money. This was a proper book. Certainly nothing that was knocked out in 5 minutes here. And maybe that was Eon Productions keeping an eye on what merchandise or memorabilia was produced for the Bond franchise, because it's all pretty high quality, and that's perhaps its appeal today. So yeah, this was the first of the 60s annuals, and I got to admit, it is an absolute corker. When I started trying to find these back in the 80s, this was the one I found first, and I believe this 1965 one is probably the easiest to get your hands on. And the 68, the last one, is possibly the hardest. But I mean, I may be wrong. But you know, a cursory look on eBay and Abe, you can get all of these annuals without too much trouble, and they're not overly expensive. This particular one, though, is just phenomenal and well worth the money. So much better than many of the annuals produced at the time. So that's the 1965 one. Now the next one we've got came out in 1966, the blue one here, and let's just put the 65 over there. And this is almost a replica of what we've just seen with regards to the last annual. Same sort of format, perhaps not quite as many colour stills. There's more generic articles on spies rather than James Bond himself. However, that sort of thing, electronic spy war, people into gadgets, you get the idea. Certainly another great one. A few more of Thunderball here, which maybe had just come out around this time. Standard comic strips. Once again, the stills are fantastic, and to see these in this glorious colour is great. It certainly is such a great annual, as they all were. I just love these 60s ones. They're fantastic. They really are. Bit on Sean Connery, the person there. Here he is on location. So this is when he did the film with Roy Kinnear, The Hill, which isn't a bad movie if you've never seen it. Colour comic strip there. Once again, the generic stories on spies and spying, as will become a bit of a theme during these annuals. Certainly the Man from U.N.C.L.E. annuals are full of it, even much more than the Bond ones. But yeah, nice, another really nice annual that. And that was the 1966 annual, once again published by World Distributors in the UK. Now, the very last one they did was the 68 annual, so there wasn't one for 1967. So this is the last one that they did, and I think, personally, this is the hardest one to find. But, I mean, that just may be my experience. You may have better luck than I did tracking a copy down. Once again, it uses a similar sort of format. However, I don't think it's quite as good as the first two. And I still think out of the three, the very first one is my favourite. However, you know, see what you think. The normal mixture of text stories and articles on spies. Not quite as many still photos as yet. A little bit on the profiles, the villains there. But once again, they could have easily put photographs in, and they've just done the artist's interpretation instead. Still no stills yet, although I'm pretty sure we do get some in this annual. Yeah, it's a bit on judo and things like that. Here's some stills here. Now, by this time, I believe You Only Live Twice had come out. So yeah, there we are. There's a couple of stills from You Only Live Twice. And that was the latest film at the time. So here we are. They've sort of put all the colour stills together, but still nowhere near as many as the other two album annuals. This is weird. It's just got a Bond game. This is far more typical of a British annual than than the first two books. Bit on the cars there, the Toyota, and there we are. Still a nice annual, and that one was the 1968. So that, in actual fact, is it for the 1960s hardback annuals. And they are really great. I'm sure you'll agree. Now, that was it until Roger Moore took over the role. And then we had this one, which was the Moonraker Special. Now, it's still published by World Distributors. It was they become World by this time. And this is surprisingly blimmin' excellent. I really am impressed with this. A World and Whitman books. Now, this doesn't look great on the surface, but in actual fact, it's absolutely packed with stuff. Articles relating to the movie itself. Don't forget, this was right on the back of The Spy Who Loved Me, and that was a huge, huge success. Certainly put Roger Moore firmly in the role of Bond. And this was, Moonraker is almost like a sequel. So it's got a quiz there. Obviously, the usual generic histories of spies and things like that. History of the Bond character, which is good. You know, even though Roger Moore was in the role, they certainly didn't forget Connery. Bob Simmons there, yeah, he was one of the stunt guys, as I recall. Bob Simmons. Goldfinger, there was a game there again. Quite a nice gallery there. Goldfinger gallery, Moonraker rather, I should say. Bond's adversaries. Lists all the novels there. That's quite nice. And then the movies with the directors attached to them, and the year of release, which is excellent. Facts on Ian Fleming. I mean, they're really good. There's not a lot of filler in here. This is actually a really well put together annual, and you know, for its time, that was unusual because other annuals of this period are nowhere near this good. So I guess they had lots of good source material to go to. This is another really good one, like Ken Adams there on the set of Moonraker. I mean, this was an annual primarily aimed at children or teenagers, and this sort of stuff is fantastic to have. I certainly remember when this one came out, and I had a copy and loved it, absolutely loved it. In fact, this may even be my original one, I can't really remember. But good stuff. So that was the Moonraker one from 79. And then they did follow it up again, virtually the same thing, and it was, however, the publishers, it wasn't World and Whitman. It had now moved to Marvel and Grand Dreams. This is Marvel UK. However, you know, this was one of those ones which I wouldn't say it's as good as Moonraker, but once again, it is surprisingly good. So see what you think. I mean, a profile of Roger Moore there, or a quiz there, a pretty good Bond quiz. Loads of stills. I mean, absolutely stacks of stills on every page. Class of '81, Roger Moore. I mean, plenty to see here, and once again, a pretty decent annual, this one. Obviously focusing on the early '80s Bond films now, so For Your Eyes Only is highlighted. Excellent scene where he visits the grave of Teresa Bond. A bit on Broccoli, the Bond villains, you know, the usual sort of thing. Yeah, certainly not a bad annual, but not quite, I would say, as good as Moonraker. Now, the very last annual, British hardback annual that came out, was Marvel Grand Dreams again, and this was the Octopussy Special. Marvel Comics had done, in fact, they did it for For Your Eyes Only as well. They actually adapted the movie, but the For Your Eyes Only adaptation is not included in the hardback, whereas in the Octopussy Special, the actual adaptation of the film is included in the book. So here we are. This is the comic strip, and it's the comic strip of the movie. So you could actually relive the movie in comic strip form in this annual, which is pretty good. I know in the States it came out as a Marvel comic special, which was a one-off which had the entire Octopussy comic strip in. So as well as the comic strip, you did have then the usual mixture of some stills, so it's quite long, stills, history of the character, the standard sort of thing you would see in these Bond annuals. This is very much Octopussy centric. Then we got the rest of the comic book adaptation pretty much back to the start. There you go. So that is the Octopussy annual, or special rather, and this one came out in 1983 and published by, as I said, Marvel UK / Grand Dreams. So there you go. That is the full set of all 6 UK released hardback James Bond annuals. So I hope you enjoyed that look through the 60s and 70s James Bond annuals. I do have some more James Bond videos planned. We're going to have a look at the Pan first edition paperbacks that came out right from Casino Royale, and also their movie novelizations as well. So if you like this video, do please give it a like and a subscribe, and I'll see you soon.